Parker. I'm a librarian with the Hillsborough County Public Library System and work primarily at the Downtown Library in Florida History and Genealogy. I'm glad you're here for our fourth and final presentation in our 9th annual Family Heritage Festival, where we're focusing on developing Florida. And with a lot of different speakers talking about photography and databases that will show us history through pictures. Now, I want to remind all of you that throughout this presentation, you can submit questions in the question box, and you can type it in, and we will be asking all of those to Matthew at the very end of our presentation. Someone's also going to be monitoring the chat box in case you have any kind of technical difficulty. So just remind you of that. And also, I need to remind you that the session is being recorded and it will be posted to the library's YouTube channel at Tampa Hillsborough Library. Tampa, Tampa, HILLSLIB.
I will drop a link to that in the chat.
Okay, thank you so much. And at this time, I want to introduce our speaker. I am so happy today to introduce Matthew Story. He is the Archives Historian at the State Archives of Florida, where he assists and helps researchers with a wide variety of topics: general Florida history, genealogy, land records, legislative history on a daily basis. And he also does tours and presentations on all the resources at the State Archives and the methods for researching Florida's historical collections. Matthew has extensive research experience in 20th century Florida history, and he holds an MA in history with a concentration in public history from FSU, my alma mater. And for fun, Matthew is also an avid cyclist. Take it away. He's going to talk to us today about genealogical resources in Florida Memory.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you today. I am always so excited to share some of the work that we do here at the State Library and the State Archives. We're working with Florida historical records every day. We have extensive photographic holdings, of course. I think our photo collections are well over 1 million images now. A lot of those you'll be able to find on Florida Memory. And that's what we're talking about today. Florida Memory is the State Library and Archives outreach website. That is to say that Florida Memory is a great place to get started in research in our collections. It is where we make selected records from our collections available online, really easy to search, really easy to use, and we're always making picks and digitizing more things that we think will be useful. So I'm going to kind of cover this presentation today in 2 parts. We're going to talk about some genealogical resources in some very generally, very broadly speaking, the type of thing that you'll find at the State Archives and on Florida Memory. We'll talk a little bit about how to use our resources as well. And then we're going to get off this PowerPoint here. We're going to go to the live Florida Memory website because I always like to, instead of just telling you how you might use this stuff, we can walk through a few examples of, what does it look like when we digitize a series of records for Florida Memory. We are not just taking a picture. We're applying a lot of really interesting digital tools so that we can leverage some technology that maybe didn't exist when a lot of these records were created, and so we can pull some new types of information out of them. So just for a start, you'll see this again later, and of course our hosts today can provide you with my contact information as well. This is how you will reach me. If a question comes to you a little later on and after I've logged off today, feel free to send me an email. One of my favorite parts about my job here at the State Archives is that I am available, as indeed are all of our resources, to any person who needs assistance doing research. So whatever your question is, my answer is yes, I will help you. I always like getting to say that for a job. So we're going to cover, first things first, kind of our facility and what where the State Archives are. It is hard, even as we're going to talk about digital resources, to fully remove ourselves from the physical structure that is the archive. So where I am now and where you will find, our shelves here in Tallahassee, Florida, this is the R.A. Gray building. I'm sitting, somewhere on the second floor of this image here. This is the Florida Department of State, and you can see actually the back of this building. It's a great big windowless box. Um, that is the archives and library storage. We have everything here. So if you ever find yourselves in Tallahassee, I hope you'll pay us a visit. We're open Monday to Friday, 9 to 4:30, and there's no appointment necessary. You can walk in, and in a lot of cases, within 10 or 15 minutes, we can get you um, records that you're interested in looking at right out onto a table for you. It's really that easy. So bear that in mind. Um, in our reading room, I am not the only staffer around here. We've got a full-time reference staff available to help. We have both librarians and archivists. Um, this is, if you're going to remember one resource that we talk about today, these folks are the most helpful, most helpful thing in the building, right? We have professional researchers who are experts not only in just general research methodologies, but in our collections as well. And especially when we're talking about specialized institutions like ours, a state archives and a state library, a lot of our resources are going to be pretty close to, if not wholly unique in all the world. And so it is good to have um, an insider in your corner. We can help you navigate those catalogs. We also have popular database services, much as probably you do at your local library as well. This being Ancestry.com, newspaper databases, things like that. We also have on microfilm, if it's convenient, microfilm copies of county records, things that will be interesting to genealogical researchers, these being things like deeds, marriage records, that kind of thing. And then finally, the State Archives maintains a genealogical collection. This is books about or books of genealogical information, and even some limited run publications where a genealogical researcher, much like yourselves, may, when their research gets to the point where they can compile it all into a book and say, here's my findings, here's how I did this, here is the data I have gathered. If somebody decides to publish that kind of thing, we try and pick those up where we can. I certainly wouldn't claim that it is a comprehensive collection, but I cannot tell you how many times it's been helpful to me. So all that being said, that's what's in the building. That's in Tallahassee. Once again, you're always welcome, but I understand that that can be a little bit of a drive. So we try and save folks that trip with Florida Memory. That is our outreach website. So I want to start out with some numbers. When we're talking about the State Archives of Florida alone, to say nothing of the library, the State Archives of Florida has more than 50,000 cubic feet of records. That it's enormous. It's kind of gives you a hint. We measure this by volume, not by pages. It comes out to several 100 million pages, and so that's just more than we could ever read in our lives, right? I've got some job security, certainly. So of course, not all of that is on Florida Memory. In fact, Florida Memory, we've been going about 30 years with this website. We've got well over 750,000 individual items on the website. In all of that time, the work is great. It's good work, but it's still less than 1% of the total holding. So just keep in mind, what we put on Florida Memory, we think is going to be really useful to a lot of different researchers. And we try to be really deliberate about what we're picking to put online and give that extra attention to. Just remember that there is a whole lot more that is not online just because, well, wouldn't you know it, there's just not enough hours in the day. I wish we could get it all online, but the truth is we actually take in more every year than we can digitize in a year. And so we have to make some choices, don't we? Bringing me to the next slide. What kind of records do we select? This is a big part of my job here at Florida Memory. As the archives historian, I am um, helping to, in many cases, and sometimes just outright selecting what are we going to digitize next. So I make this evaluation based partly on its research value to patrons, things that I know are going to be the most useful to the most people. So this is things like census records. We have voter registration rolls, things that are, especially, for a genealogical researcher, that's going to help us figure out that combination, that good intersection of information, a person at a place at a certain time. We've also got some records that we've digitized, that might apply to more specific cases. I've got here as examples state and county directories. That would be anybody who served in an elected or an appointed position in county or state governments, right? That is certainly not everybody, but it is useful nevertheless. Another good example would be the Florida State Prison Register. That is not, I think, typically something we may expect to find, especially doing family history research. But it could happen that you find out maybe an ancestor got in some trouble with the law and perhaps served some time at the Florida State Prison. Those registers would get you um, the dates they did that time, the crime they were convicted of, and where. There are certain cases we can even find a mugshot. That's not every time, but it does happen. So these are kind of some narrower niche records, but they are still valuable because at the state archives we have the complete set, right? And so we can digitize that whole thing and make it available on the internet, and it's going to be there way more accessible than it ever would have been sitting on our shelf. Um, so at this point, I do want actually to give me a moment while I shuffle what I'm sharing here. I'm going to show you the live website. It's one thing to talk about Florida Memory, but I can just show you as well. For those of you who are not familiar, I think Florida Memory is a great site. I'm not saying that just because I work here. When I was in graduate school, when I, was doing academic research, this site was really valuable. Honestly, some days I come home from work and I just want to look at some cool pictures and I go right back to Florida Memory. I enjoy it as a user too. So um, let's start with just a really basic tour of this. Here is our home page. You will see we typically keep an image front and center. Right now, we have a guide to military records and the wartime experience we've fairly recently completed. So that's going to be a good research primer. Maybe if you're researching military history in the state of Florida, or you're looking for an ancestor who may have served here in Florida. But generally, your main menu up here is going to be discover, learn, and share. Okay, so um, discover is where we're going to be today, but just so you know, the learning section of Florida Memory, we do sometimes package up our records into exhibits or research tools. Every once in a while, I will write an article, or my colleagues will write an article about just a fun topic in Florida history. So those Floridiana articles can be very interesting, and sometimes maybe a little bit offbeat. We'd like to find kind of some neat stories. We also have if any of you are educators, you may be interested to know we've got primary source sets and lesson plans kind of prepackaged that you can just take off the shelf and use. Um, you'll also see the share tab. Any image, especially on Florida Memory, but this applies to audio records and videos too. If you want like a higher quality file, you're certainly welcome to download anything you want from Florida Memory. Everything on this website we offer, to our knowledge, is in the public domain. You can do with it as you please. They're all public records, right? It's yours anyways. But if you need like a high quality scan or something, you can order that, and we'll work with you to meet your needs in that way. What we're interested in today as researchers is discover. Okay, so very broad categories here: historical records, photos, maps, audio, and video. Sometimes Florida Memory can be a really good tool for accessibility. Photographs, especially, I can tell you, most of the state archives photographic holdings exist on the shelf as negatives, and so if any of you were to walk into our reading room and say, hello, I would like to see some negative photographs, we would absolutely bring you a light table and a magnifying glass, and you could look at those negatives. And if you're anything like me, you could get a headache too while you do that. So a lot of our photos are online first. Um, so for example, here's one from the Bruce Mozart photographic collection. Uh, Mr. Mozart was an underwater photographer. This is a pretty recent collection for us. I just love this image. They're like working on some homemade weighted rig, and the guy is, I think, welding and smoking, which is quite the combination. Um, just, some interesting photography. Here's the Tampa Public Library, the Robert F. Germany building, where I imagine some of you may be even now. Uh, all sorts of photos on Florida Memory. So if we're interested in photography, in our sub theme, do check us out. We have got photos of places in Florida dating back to 1849. The earliest known photo of Florida is in our collections. It's an aerial view of Key West. Um, but moving along to things that may be interesting from a genealogical perspective, I want to show you our historical records page. So what we have here are not all of the historical records on Florida Memory. These are all of the historical records which we have digitized that full run, right? So um, just in terms of how we're thinking about this information, let's take a look at the 1825 Leon County Census, because it's actually pretty brief. In 1825, not a whole lot of people lived in Florida, period, much less Leon County. So these 5 pages are actually the whole thing. But certainly for larger series, for this one too, I would never, look at this stuff on the shelf and say, I really like page 2. I'm just going to digitize page 2. We can leave the rest out. Um, Far from it. So we are going to digitize the image. You can see what the original looks like. Our digitization, our scanners can get really high quality. In a lot of cases, you can even zoom in. If you were really keen on doing it, you could see just like the fiber of this paper. You know what I mean? But we're not just taking a picture. We're going to fully catalog this record. And in a lot of cases, stuff like this, where, this census, it's a spreadsheet and it's in cursive script, we're going to fully transcribe and index this record. So we can scroll down a little bit and we will see a typed version of that same information. So number one, if you're like me, I have trouble with that handwriting sometimes. So it's nice to have just the typewritten version as well. But also, these transcripts support searchability. Our computers can understand this now. So say you're looking through one of these spreadsheets and I'm really interested in John Allen. We can search Allen and our computer can help us search a little bit faster. So that is the kind of treatment we're giving to a lot of these um, informational resources that we've got on Florida Memory. So I'll show you another example of just kind of how powerful these tools can be. So we've got in the state archives early automotive registrations from 1905 to 1917. In those very early years, there was no, state road commission or anything like that. And so cars were like this new technology. And with the Department of State, previously, if you were like a rail carrier, if you had a railroad or a steamship, you'd have to register with the Secretary of State. And so cars just kind of like default under that, oh, the Secretary of State deals with motorized things, register your car with him. So we've got these interesting little books. So I'll show you what one of these volumes looks like. So once again, we have our, image of the record itself. And then also, these are a little more than 5 pages, so we've done the index a bit differently. You see this tab here, right to the right of the description. We have a searchable name index, and so we can, of course, sort alphabetically by name. We can sort by date of registration. We can sort by registration number. It looks like the very first car uh, bought in Florida belonged to a certain RC brand of Jensen. That was a Locomobile number 2 standard. We can also search. So we can search any information in this table. So the creator was only doing one thing with this record, right? They were recording the name of the person in the car they registered. but we can resort, we can remix this information in ways that they never thought about when they were making this ledger. So we can say, show me every electric car. Even back in the early 1900s, there were some electric cars on the road. They kind of fell out of favor, um, just because gasoline is a whole lot easier to make portable, and you can't throw a spare battery in the back of your car in those days. An electric car had a range of like 20 miles. A perfect grocery getter, but these are phased out. But um, they're interesting nevertheless, and so we can say, show me every electric car registered in the state, right? We can do some new things with this data that we couldn't before. The final thing I'll want to mention, this is just an interesting series of records to me for the time they're created. So these are the voter registration rolls of 1867 and 1868. We can browse these by county if we wanted to. We've got a nice little selector here. So let's just look at Hernando County. Um, these resources, right, much the same searchability tools. Um, as a family history document, these voter registration rolls are very interesting. Now, in 1867, let's say it up front, only men were voting. This is before women had the right to vote. So unfortunately, we're going to have to knock out about half the population. They're not going to appear on this document. But who does appear on this document? In 1867, this is the first election that, well, former slaves could vote in. And in fact, in a lot of cases, this document we have on the website is going to be the first place that um, many former slaves are going to appear by their full names in a government document. So that is an interesting detail to keep in mind if you're doing family history research, and it maybe you've got to the point where you're searching for some ancestors who were enslaved during the period before the Civil War. This might provide a really helpful clue. Once they enter that record, where did they live at the time? um, so always something I like to mention on these demonstrations. Here's that county officer directory I mentioned a little earlier. um, these are especially nice because you can sort um, by county. So, we could do a lot of Hillsborough County research. We could also sort by, position within that. So we can pretty quickly say, show me everybody who was ever a judge in Hillsborough County. I used to get this question a whole lot before these resources were digitized, and the list is, possible to come to. There are about 50 of these directory volumes. By weight about 1 ton, and it would take me a couple of days to get you a list of judges for whichever county, but it's a whole heck of a lot easier now. Look, we just did it just like that. So it's interesting to be able to assemble the history of certain county offices. um, some of the other types of things we have, these are actually visually quite interesting and can be very helpful. If any of you are familiar with the Florida State Genealogical Society, you can apply for a Florida Pioneer Certificate. That is to say, was your family here before statehood? The Spanish land grants can be very valuable for that. So what these documents are basically is when Florida changes over to the possession of the United States, people certainly lived here already, and they would apply to a commission. They would gather up all of the legal documents that they had had under the Spanish legal system and say to this United States Commission, here's the proof I own the land I live on. I would like to keep owning this land, please. And, they'd weigh in, confirm or not confirm that application. On Florida Memory, we've got both confirmed and unconfirmed grants. Um, Interesting enough, these are still in certain places in Florida part of the active chain of title for certain properties. So, this is not just back in the past. What I always like to show off, though, on the Spanish land grants is the maps. Some of these packets include these beautifully illustrated in colored maps, which is just really interesting. In the United States, we describe land very differently. If any of you, are familiar with legal description of land, or maybe your deed might even specify that your lot is on the, northwest one quarter of the southern one half of section 16 of township, whichever range, whichever. Um, in the United States, we lay out our legal description on a grid. Um, in the Spanish Empire, legal description was done. If we look closely here on the corners of this map, there's just some drawings of trees. Um, very often, a Spanish surveyor would pick some trees and say, everything between these is yours. Sometimes they would produce a lovely little map by way of a description to say, well, here's some good woodland, marshland. It's got a river running through it. These are just very pretty to look at, so I wanted to share it with you. I just think they're neat. We also have maps more for navigational purposes. Here we have a looks like a French map of Florida and the Carolinas circa 1749. We can see that Florida was not quite as known as it is now. There's a mountain range here running down the peninsula. I'm fairly assured that we don't have one of those. But hey, I can pull up Google and look at the place from space. We've got a very interesting map collection, and if we're talking about photography, kind of tying back into your special theme for this year, um, this is trying to do the same thing. It's just photography wasn't invented yet. So a lot of hand illustrated things here in the State Archives of Florida, and certainly on Florida Memory as well. Um, we've covered some photography already. Final thing I want to mention, and then I want to open this up for questions when we're talking about family history research. I found it's best not to try and anticipate what people are, struggling with. I want to hear your questions, so we'll open that up soon. I do want to mention audio resources on Florida Memory, especially. I've been working with these a lot lately. I think they're really cool. The Florida Folk Festival recordings. So for those of you who don't know, Florida has had a folk music festival and folk craft and storytelling festival running since 1954. And as a matter of fact, my colleagues, just as Florida has a historian, that's me. We also have a state folklorist who goes around the state and tries to gather up um, oral histories and traditions and recipes and all sorts of crafts in our state. And every year, the Folk Festival convenes all of these wonderful artists to celebrate their talent. And we've got audio recordings of most of those performances, which I think is really neat. So if you're looking for something to listen to a little later on today, keep Florida Memory in mind. We've got quite the catalog. So let me move back to my PowerPoint. There's a few more things I want to mention to you. Um, and that is just a quick note on everything else that is not on Florida Memory, the things I can't show you over the internet because they are somewhere on a shelf here in my building. Um, So Florida Memory is 1% of the total holdings. For the rest, we do have a separate online catalog. You can find a link to it at the bottom of any Florida Memory page, or you can do what I do. I just Google State Archives of Florida catalog. Um, Everything on our shelf is organized by series, that being a rough combination of creator and activity. So if you recall those automotive registrations, that is a series of records from the Florida Department of State. Of course, the Department of State does a whole heck of a lot more. Um, Archives and elections and the Division of Corporations, all of those are going to be separate series of records because the activity is separate. We want to maintain that internal organization. Um, all this to say, when we're doing genealogical research in the full archives catalog, this becomes an exercise of making educated guesses about where our ancestor may have crossed a paper trail at the state level. So, did they serve in the county government? Immediately, we know to look at those directories. Did they maybe serve in World War One? We've got service cards for every World War One veteran of Florida. So there are things like that. Our reference staff is absolutely available to help you access and navigate all this stuff. And in fact, in most cases, they can even help you remotely within about 48 hours, 2 working days. They can get you a PDF scan of just about anything in our collection. So please do not feel like you have to come to Tallahassee to use the State Archives of Florida. we have got staff, a great staff of expert researchers who are going to connect you with the resources you need. Um, so those two things to remember. Number one, there's a whole lot more to see from our collections than what I can cover today. And two, we have a great staff who are always ready to help you. And in fact, that is their contact information right there. I'll leave that up while we open up for questions. I hope you've got some good questions. I am certainly happy to maybe even help you out here live. But if we need to be in touch a little further, I can give you some guesses of where to look. We can email after this. I am at your disposal. So um, I'll open up the floor for questions, folks.
All right, folks, go ahead and get those questions in. We don't have any typed questions yet, so we'll give folks a chance to get those typed. Miss Selena, if you can hear me, if you have any questions from the audience at the John F. Germany Library, if you could add those to the chat, we're happy to go through those as well. And while you're typing away, I'm going to go ahead and get my information up here for Miss Pam to tell you about a great resource.
Okay, so and I will also add another plug for Florida Memory. It is a link on our history and genealogy page on the library's website. If you go under learning and research, you'll see history and genealogy, and we have linked to Florida Memory, but as well, we link to the Sanborn maps. This is another really great resource that the library is fortunate to have. Not only do we have online access to the Sanborn maps for cities throughout Florida, we have the books from Tampa, published in 1931, revised through the mid-1950s, print version. What Sanborn maps do is allow you to look at the city at the time and look at a block or a street and see a flat image of the houses and buildings that are on a street. So it would allow you in doing genealogical research, maybe to see where your family lived and who might have lived around them. It allows you to research what we like to call the genealogy of your house. Was it there? How big was it? What was it made out of? Wood? Was it made out of concrete? Was there an attached garage? Was there a detached garage? So we're very lucky we have these 4 volumes in our main reading room in the Florida History and Genealogy collection on the library's 4th floor, and also the digital access through ProQuest for library cardholders. Gosh, Matthew, thank you so much for everything you had to say. I hope we're getting some good questions. I've always been really impressed with the pictures in Florida Memory and the fact that you've captured so many historic sites in the state of Florida with these beautiful images. But how do people send you? It looks, a lot of times they look like family vacation pictures. How do you get your pictures?
Oh, sure. So, and I can go back to the live site for this. So we've got a lot of different ways that uh, photographs come into our collections. So um, a little bit of the history now of Florida Memory. So Florida Memory actually began as a way to put the Florida Photographic Collection online. We're going to go back now to the 1960s and 70s. Joan and Alan Morris. Alan Morris was for a long time clerk of the Florida House of Representatives. He and his wife Joan um, saw a need and indeed began to collect photography from all around the state of Florida. And so the very core of that photographic collection are things that the Morrises picked. And in a lot of ways, in a lot of cases, Pam, that might literally be a family photo where somebody loaned Joan their photograph and she made a darkroom copy of it and they added it to the photographic collection. So there are cases, and even still today, we take in digital donations from individual people all the time. But we've also got a ton of, other, you know, like there is a Florida photographic collection in that, yes, that is a discrete group of photos, but that's also our word for all of our photos, because indeed it is a collection of photographs held by Florida. Go figure. So we've got collections within that, which may be, um, from a certain family, the Buckley, the Caldwell, the Connell collections. We've got something like 50,000 photographs from the Florida Department of Commerce, these being a lot of tourism photos from the mid-century, things like days at the beach, rest stops, the Ringling Circus, stuff like that. We've got, ooh, I like this picture right here. We've got number 33, Otis of the Swamp Buggy Parade. So stuff like that, the state's going to photograph for, kind of promotional purposes. Um, Other cases, here's the Alvin S. Harper photographic collection. Let me let this finish loading. We've got 1,400 items from the Harper collection alone. Harper was a professional photographer working in Tallahassee, did a lot of portrait photography of people around town. And so it is really all sorts of stuff here. These have been accumulated over the better part of a century now, starting with the Morrises, growing a lot since then. And in fact, we have so many photos. We have a specialized photographic archivist, Adam Watson, who is a little better versed than I am in some of the preservation concerns of different types of photography. At that point, we're talking about chemistry. How is this stuff all going to age together? Um, Now, that's also I'll mention, it's not just historic photographs. We've got like cell phone pictures people took a couple years ago, even. Let me see if I can find. There was one recently. I was looking at a certain Futuro house in Pensacola. If y'all have ever seen these places, they look kind of like, well, they look like a spaceship.
Ooh.
This is just a cell phone photograph, and I was just looking at it, and my boss took this picture, and donated it to Florida Memory. It's a digital photograph. It's not taking up much room, and it is an interesting piece of architecture on Pensacola Beach. Um, so that, I hope, answers your question. We take in photos from all sorts of people. You don't have to be a professional photographer. Indeed, things that are happening now are history. So we like folks to document that stuff.
We do have another question that's come in that asks what your favorite part of the Florida Memory Collection is.
Oh, that's like, I have a few. There's a little bit like which is my favorite child. So I've shown you a couple
We
of
all
them.
have a favorite, it's true.
One of my very favorites is that Bruce Mozart photographic collection. So we can go back to the Mozart collection. Um, and what I really like about those is that Mozart was active with a lot of Paramount Pictures productions. He was one of the first underwater photographers really to do that. We have some of his camera enclosures. They're like homemade hardware store parts. And so he's one of the first people to do underwater photography and to kind of figure it out. And he takes all these wonderful images of um, let me see if I can find just a good one. He loves to do scenes of more or less things you might do on land, except underwater. We're going to be able to see like an underwater picnic or something. He did a lot of work in Silver Springs and in that area. Let's see. Here is a certain Miss Jones celebrating the new year, or no, hawking the Saturday Evening Post in Silver Springs. So they set up a little newsstand underwater, and the springs, of course, are so clear that you can do that. Very notably, I like movies. Mozart worked a little bit on Creature from the Black Lagoon and its sequel, so I'm going to search Gillman, and I think we'll be able to see some behind-the-scenes photography of Creature from the Black Lagoon. Another thing I really enjoy while I'm waiting on this search to come through, and while I stall as I'm finding this photo, those Spanish land grants I showed you are really interesting for kind of a funny reason. So um, you'll see it a lot. If any of you ever taken a flight out west and you see all the streets, all the fields, everything, it's laid out on a perfect grid, north, south, east, and west. That is the product of the United States Public Land Survey System. We think about land and property along those lines. The Spanish did not, and so in Florida, you can often see even on like a satellite view, near like St. Augustine, especially, you might see like a whole neighborhood that is askew and it's off the grid. And in a lot of cases, that used to be a Spanish land grant. It was already surveyed, and like that imaginary line between the trees has just physically shaped our world, which I find endlessly fascinating. Um, so I'm geeking out about that. I'm struggling to find the Gilman. I know Rico Browning was the performer in that suit, so we might have some better luck here. A major part of my day, folks, is doing just this very thing, searching for stuff on Florida Memory that I know I've seen it and I can't remember where. Oh, here we go. Yes, here is the creature for the sequel, Revenge of the Creature. Let's open that up so that y'all can see. You can see, how it worked here. You got the air hose, you got the diver to help him. I really like that Mozart collection. That's still pretty new to us, so we're always finding a bunch of new photos in that collection. That's certainly my favorite where photos are concerned. I'd also recommend the Steinmetz collection. Mr. George Steinmetz did a ton of photography around the Ringling Circus and showbiz, and some of those are pretty fun. Thank you for your question, Selena. Are there any other questions? Maybe you yourself, you're doing some family history research, and I certainly hope it's not the case, but if you've kind of hit some speed bumps, I'd love to chat about it. If you'd like to pose your question, maybe you're not the only person chewing on those problems. Maybe we can solve some together. Those kind
Well,
of questions are great too.
I'm sure I'd be the only person asking this question, but I guess you don't have marriage records from Alligator, Florida back in 1840.
We very well may. We need to find out which. Let me go back to my slides here so people can. Once again, I'll hit that contact information. We'll just need to figure out Alligator, Florida.
Lake City.
We're looking at a county record now. So that is in, what county is that in? I'm sorry, help me out here.
It's either Columbia or, isn't it Columbia or Hamilton? I'm really vague on that county up there without having a map, but it's Lake City. So it's
Okay.
up in.
Well,
Is-
let's assume it's Columbia. So we may have records now. In a lot of cases, when we're going back to the 1840s, Florida only had like 8 counties then, so we would need to kind of walk back through which courthouse the records would have gone to when they were created. Columbia
It
County.
looks like someone is saying that it is Columbia County today.
Okay.
Shelby, thank you. Here we are. I'm getting stumped even on that. It looks like we have on microfilm marriage records back to 1874, so I'm afraid we've missed by a little bit.
Okay.
However, how things work in Florida is that the original would still be at the county level. Our microfilm were made in the course of a project back in the 70s and the 80s, and so there's always a chance that not everything was filmed. I can imagine, maybe a volume from 1840 might have been a little delicate. So it would be worth.
It may have burned up. I've heard that too.
This happens too. What I would say to that question is, it looks like we don't have it. Sometimes we're lucky. It's worth a call to the clerk of court, see what they've got.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
So for those who may have been on our webinar earlier today about kind of documenting your photos and how to label them and maybe keep track of those, we briefly talked about someone that had questions about documenting postcards from and to someone and how to document that if it was from or to someone. And I'll point out that Florida Memory has a collection specifically of postcards. So if that person from this morning is also on this webinar, you might enjoy looking through that postcard collection for Florida Memory.
We treat
They're
those a
real,
lot
they're
like
be-
photos. They're
they're
going to be
beautiful.
cataloged like photos. And many of them, Pam, you're right, are beautiful, colored and illustrated postcards. A lot of fun.
So remember, folks, get those questions typed in. We'd love a chance to answer them on the air. I can almost guarantee if you have a question, somebody else is thinking that question, they just haven't typed it. So even if it's a very specific question that you think might not apply to someone else, it might be in a situation like with Pam's question, where hers was very specifically about a county, but it let us explore how to find something just like that.
Oh, and I will add, Elizabeth has come to bail me out. Columbia County was created from Alachua, as Shelby helped us out with. That split happened in 1832. So for Alachua County, we do have deed records and marriage records back into the 1830s. But depending on when that marriage happens versus when the split happens, we do still have kind of some gray area as to whether that marriage record Pam's looking for might exist in our collections.
All right, we'll get our contact information back up here in the background. All right, I see another question has come in that asks if somebody from out of state, if they're able to get help accessing records about family members in the archive.
Oh, absolutely. This is one of actually my favorite things about the State Archives of Florida. So, if you wanted to dive into the statute that sets up the State Archives of Florida, you will find that by law, our collections are open and accessible to any person, period. That is the only bar you got to clear to use the State Archives of Florida. You got to be a person anywhere around the world. And indeed, we do help folks from all around the world. Um, in a lot of cases, we can scan, photocopies of even stuff that's not on Florida Memory and get you connected with the information that you need. So somebody from out of state, absolutely, we will be thrilled to help them with family history research.
Libraries and archives are for everyone. All right, we have another question that came in from our live audience over at the John F. Germany building, and they believe that a family member may have been the first African-American sheriff or policeman in Hillsborough County, and how they would go about tracking that down.
Okay, so this is going to be a two-parter because sheriff, pretty readily knowable. In fact, we can pull up a list of sheriffs from Hillsborough County right now. And I will hope they see their family member's name. Now, things can get a little tricky when we're talking about police officers, just because that is not like an elected or an appointed position. That's just something you're hired for. And so police officers can be a little more difficult to find. When we're talking about the first African American police officer, I would absolutely look at some newspaper resources, and I bet they'll be accessible there in the building. But let's find those Hillsborough County sheriffs real fast, and we can just do that right here, right now. That's why we do all of our indexing work. So here is all elected and appointed officials in Hillsborough County. We're going to the name index just like earlier, and we're just going to hit sheriff. And that will be a list. We'll sort this by date. Looks like the first sheriff we've got in 1874 was a certain J.R. Hay, followed shortly by, and let's see, an Isaac Kraft, a James P. Martin. There can be some overlap here, but I would point you to that resource. If you think this ancestor was a sheriff, they're probably going to appear there. Police officers can be a little tricky, but we can get at that too if you want to send me an email.
And if you're
All
looking
right, and
for, Lisa, if you're looking for any kind of newspaper stuff, we can help here. I think you put up our email help for Florida history and genealogy. And we certainly take questions that might
Absolutely.
involve getting in a newspaper. Mhm.
Let's get that up here in the background. So we do have another question that has come in. Do this here while we're doing that. So yes, as Pam mentioned, we have the email address here at the bottom of the screen. That email will go directly to our genealogy team at the library. So we have someone that was wondering if the Florida Memory Project had any issues with censorship.
For the most part, no. Now, do keep in mind that, within Florida's public records law, there are some things which are, exempt from public disclosure. Anyways, a great example would be, my first job here in the state archives. I was reviewing a lot of the governor's email correspondence. Charlie Crist, some older email correspondence after he had left office. And very commonly people would write him, and they might share, they're a judge or something, and it's their home address, or somebody might say like, oh my gosh, my credit card got stolen, here's the number. We're not going to release that kind of thing, of course. But in terms of censorship, there's nothing we're not going to share. It's all public records. So for the most part, that's not really a concern of ours, other than, there are things that we may not release because it is sensitive information under Florida law. And certainly we're going to follow the law in those cases.
All right, it sounds like we might be winding down on questions. We did have a patron that added a helpful link to a book resource about Florida sheriffs. So we hope that is helpful to the person attending. They mentioned that the title there is Florida Sheriffs: A History. So that is very helpful. Thank you to that person, and we'll see if we can't get the person looking for their family member going the right direction there. If I have missed a question, definitely give me a nudge here, but I'm backtracking just to make sure that I haven't, and I think we have got all of our questions so far. So the book that was mentioned, we do have that in our collection as well, and I'm going to put a link to the library version of that book.
I do want to address Christina's follow-up. Is Research with Us a free service? Yes, our staff will even do up to 90 minutes of research, with you, help you out. Now, we do have a fee schedule if you need copies of things and stuff like that. That's typically going to be 25 cents a page. If we're taking something off the shelf and photocopying it, that does take a certain amount of time. They're archival records, they're delicate, and so we do charge a little bit. And then the main constraint there is going to be time. If we can do about 100 pages per day for any given order. Equally, everything on Florida Memory is free to use, but if you want, that high quality image, if you want us to do a higher quality scan and send that to you, or we'll even print you a photo on, good quality paper, photo paper, and send it to you, we would charge for that. So there are circumstances where yes, fees will apply. But in terms of the service and the resource, using it is free. When we start sending you some things and copies and stuff like that, we will charge.
The information might be free, but the stuff may not be.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well put.
All right. Well, I believe we are winding down our questions. So, Pam, I will let you close us out here.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Matthew, for participating today and enlightening all of us on this absolutely wonderful state resource available to us. Thanks to everyone for attending our 9th annual Family Heritage Festival. We hope you learned a lot, and we'll be planning already for next year. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So nice to meet you.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Take care.